Hi out there in Guitar Moderne land. Today's interview is with Knox Chandler. I interviewed Knox a while back for the magazine, but this is on the occasion of his new record with Eric Mingus called Bursting Blue Bone Bark. Knox played with the Psychedelic Furs, Siouxsie and the Banshees, Cyndi Lauper, did a lot of projects with Hal Wilner, some stuff with R.E.M., but he has more recently moved into truly modern guitar territory using extensively iPads and apps that work with those iPads, and he's turned me on to a lot of them that I've hopefully turned you on to, like High Density and Borderlands and things like that. Today we talk about his past, we talk about his present, we talk about his encounters with everybody from Charles Mingus's wife and adopted son to R.E.M., Cyndi Lauper, and Chris Whitley, and a host of other people. Knox has worked with so many different people, and he moved to Berlin in 2012, and he teaches school there and works with people there as well. So enjoy my discussion with Knox Chandler. What prompted you to move to Berlin?
Budgie.
From
You know Budgie?
No, but from Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Yeah, because I used to play with them, and then I did the Banshees, and I did the Creatures, and then I did the Dream Show, and that was like I think 2005 was the Dream Show, and then it was then I moved out to Brooklyn, and then I was off with Cyndi touring for good bunch of years there, all over the world, making records, touring, and then I came to a bit of a halt with her. And so I wound up, it was kind of, things, all of a sudden things came to a halt. And I wound up doing some film stuff, which was okay. And I went off to went to Hong Kong. That's right. I went to Hong Kong to do this festival, the festival hall there for 2 nights with Budgie, Leonard Ito on taiko drums, Mabi, he used to play with Miles on percussion, and what was his name? The Japanese guitar violinist star, heavy metal guy. Let's think his name's Suzuki or something. I forget his name. He's very famous. Really white, nice guy. It was a very interesting gig, and I was there for a bit of time. And Budgie had just moved to Berlin, and he started going on about it. And I'd been through Berlin a lot over the years, but never spent any time here. I mean, I played East Berlin when the wall was up.
Wow.
Going through Checkpoint Charlie with like the tanks and the World War II uniforms, that kind of shit.
Who was that with?
Psychedelic Furs.
Okay.
Then yanked off stage mid-song to get back over the border before curfew. It was crazy. But so I went back and I was, Budgie was, going on about Berlin, and I was really not happy with where I was living. It was too noisy. I was doing a lot of recording, and these kids upstairs running back and forth, and I was having to like EQ out the thumping.
This was in Brooklyn?
This is in Brooklyn, yeah. And then Budgie was like, "Hey man, why don't you just come and live with us in Berlin for a while and see if you like it?" And that got the ball rolling. And I was thinking, well, yeah, there's nothing keeping me in New York anymore. I had no reason to be there. There was no work that I was enjoying. And plus, I've always had this thing where I felt that I had got sidetracked since college with my career. There was all this stuff I really wanted to do, much more experimental, and got sidetracked with this rock pop career. And I knew some people, I knew of some stuff that was happening in Berlin. Anyway, I thought, okay, I'll try Berlin. If not Berlin, Tokyo. If not Tokyo, Buenos Aires. And I came to Berlin. I sold, stored, threw away, gave away everything I owned. Got it down to like a suitcase, a guitar, and a backpack, and and just fell in love with Berlin. I mean, it was just like whoa. It's so. It wasn't the of course I came in the spring, so spring summer is very different than winter. I think most of the time I've been to Berlin was probably in the winter, so I didn't realize how lush it was and green it was here, and there's parks everywhere and lakes and all sorts of stuff. It's like a city in the middle of this huge forest. But just the pace of it, the fact that it was relatively inexpensive, so people I were meeting there, all of them were doing what they love to do. They didn't have to worry about doing some other job to make their pay their rents and whatnot. It's so. And then I spent, just as I think I've told you before, I spent 2 years just completely experimenting from where I left off, like from college, just like getting more deeper into it. We're using, like as the iPad stuff and computer processing.
What year was that you moved there?
2012.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's funny. That's the same year I moved to Nashville.
Yeah. I think there are a few people that moved out around that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I went. I only been to Berlin once, but I loved it. Have you learned German? Have you learned to speak German? No.
I've studied it. It's so tough. And it's funny you say that. I'm supposed to start again. My girlfriend's daughter, who's just about 12, is I'm hiring her to start teaching me.
That'll work.
Keep it in the family. But no, it's everyone speaks English here. So as soon as I start speaking German, they answer me in English.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the other thing is, I gotta after being here for a couple of years, I did nothing for 2 years, but working with these iPad apps, and just got deep into like recording and all that stuff on my own, developing this other side of me. And then I started branching out, started working with different people, recording and performing. At the same time, I got this job offer to be the head of the guitar department at a college here. And so that was a bit of a learning curve, but then they put me through school. They paid for my extra schooling, so I got a postgraduate degree in pedagogy, and that was a lot of studying and a lot of work, and I just didn't have the capability to even think of learning German.
Right.
And that went on for 3 years. And then after when that was done, I was just like, I don't want to learn anything.
Well, I forgot. Did you study guitar? I know you studied cello, but did you ever formally study guitar?
I never studied cello.
Oh, I thought you played cello for some reason.
I played cello. Yes, I'm on the Psychedelic Furs record, and on the R.E.M. Automatic for the People, Cyndi Lauper. Yeah, a bunch of other records. I toured with it. I'm totally self-taught. I didn't take it up. It's a funny story. I studied guitar since I was 7. Okay. I went to college, where I studied with Woody Mann in college a little bit, and then I got into the upright bass, and I studied upright bass with Ken Fricker, played in the orchestra, and focused a lot on more contemporary classical music and improvisational music. And the guitar, I was in a few rock bands playing guitar, but my focus was really more on upright bass. And I moved to New York City thinking I was going to be an upright bass player. And I just got all these funny, because you think that, well, at least it's competitive being a guitar player. But a bass player, they're in need, And
right.
The funniest thing was I just jumped right into the whole guitar thing, and that just snowballed. I had to sell my upright bass, and then it was after we made that first Furs record they brought a cellist in, and it was in London at Rack Studios. They brought a cellist in on a track, and they used to have a cellist in the band when it was Forever Now, Ann Sheldon, who played on Sleep Comes Down and some of those other songs, President Gas. And she, funny enough, she was in the band with me and Gary Window, and died on the way to a New Year's Eve gig in a car accident.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they had cellists, always had some little cello thing in there. That we were getting ready to start pre-production for the tour of that record, the first record, Book of Days, and Richard was around my apartment, and he was just like, I don't know where this came from. He just said, "Hey Knox, why don't you play cello on this tour?" And I'm like, "I don't play cello." he was like, "Yeah, you're a musical genius. You could do it." And I'm like, "But Richard, I don't even have a cello." And he's like, "Well," and I said, "Well, my sister has a cello in Connecticut she doesn't use." And he says, "There you go." And I was like, "Richard, but it's tuned differently. I play German bow on the bass. I don't think he knew I played bass even. I don't think he even knew that. I don't know where it came from." And so I went out and got it. Needed some work, had some work done, and I just woodshedded. And I learned there was 3 or 4 songs that they wanted cello on, and I learned that, and basically learned how to play in front of several thousand people a night, and it was nerve rattling.
I'll bet.
It was awful. But then from there, I went and did all this cello stuff on the World Outside record, and then Richard took me down to Athens, Georgia, with him. He and Peter Buck, myself, and John Dean did a version of Pink Moon for some compilation record, and I played this simple cello ostinato thing, and then I got a call a couple months later from Peter saying, "Hey, you remember that thing you played?" Which was actually a part that Richard sung to me. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, I wrote a song around it. We want to hire you for automatic for the record we're making." So I went up to Bearsville and recorded a couple songs up there. And then it was mentioned on MTV, and the next thing you know, the phone was calling me, and I was like, "Well, what are you looking for?" I mean, I can play it through a 2290 and make all sorts of great sounds. And then they would say, "Well, we're looking for call Jane Scarpantoni. Here's her number." I'm not really a cellist.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess I'd forgotten that you play upright bass, and then I saw the video of you playing with Billy Goodman playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we ever talked about that. I met Frank in I don't even remember where, in New York, I guess, at these pickin' parties, and I think I might have played with Billy once at the pickin' party also. And
the funny thing about Billy was that I knew Billy back in around '89, and Billy and we were good buddies and used to hang out, and we were in pre-production for the world. Maybe it was '90. We were in pre-production. I gotta ignore it. We were in pre-production for World Outside record, right? And Billy calls me up and he goes, "Hey, you got to get down to Ludlow Street Cafe tonight. You got to see this guy, Chris Whitley, play." And I'm like, "Really?" He goes, "No, you have to go." And so I'm like, "John, we got to go and check out this guitar player." And he said, "Well, I can't make it. I got to stay here and deal with the studio." And so I went over there, and there's maybe about 6 people in the audience, and he blew my mind. I was just like,
as he
what
would.
the fuck?
Yeah.
And then the next night, it was limos around the block, completely packed, and he got signed. Shortly after that, he was signed to Sony as we were. I remember being up there doing a press junket up at Sony, and at the end they give out all their new artist CDs and stuff, and John's like, "Hey, here's that Chris Whitley guy you're talking about." And I said, "Oh yeah, cool. Let's see him." Took the CD and I went back and listened to it, and it was like nothing like what I heard. So I was rather disappointed. And And then John listened to it. And he gets on the bus to go or tour. He goes, "That Chris Whitley album is amazing." And I said, "I'm like, John, you have no idea. You just have no idea." And then he found out. But it was around that time that Billy just all of a sudden disappeared. He just really just.
Did he go overseas to work with his brother? Because his brother had some sort of big radio station in Asia or something, or was working in radio or something like that in Asia. I know they had a brother who was over there, so I don't know if he went over there.
I don't think he went. I think he came straight to. I think he came straight to Germany.
Okay.
He was in Heidelberg, and I was here. I was here for I moved here maybe not even a full year. I was here, and I was thinking about Billy the night before. I was thinking about hanging out with him. I was thinking about him turning me on to Chris Whitley, and then all of a sudden, the next day, I bumped into him. It was just so weird, and I'm like, "Billy," and he thought I was somebody else because obviously I looked a lot different. and I was like, "No, it's Knox," and he goes, "Man, do you live here?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and he goes, "Great, I'm moving here." Because he was living in Heidelberg and he was in Berlin just checking it out. I wasn't sure if he was going to move. Yeah, I saw Billy yesterday. I'm pretty good friends with Billy.
Well, let's talk about the record. How did you hook up with Eric Mingus originally?
Through Hal Wilner. Are you recording this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. I got to be careful what I'm saying.
Nah.
I thought this was going to be a little more informal. Well, we can make it informal.
Yeah.
No, it was through Hal Wilner. You know what was really weird was I went to college with Roberto Ongaro, who is Charlie Mingus's stepson, and he was able to get Charlie Mingus to play our college that final year. This was like 1980, I believe.
What college was that?
Bard College.
Okay.
And I was really good friends with Roberto. So I used to go, and Charlie Mingus had a hunting shack outside of Woodstock where the band would often rehearse and hang out. And I used to go there and hang out with the band and mostly help Roberto doing landscaping, which meant we drank a bunch of beer and shotguns and fished. That's kind of what we did. And then when he died, I got to know Sue. At one point, Sue wanted to give me one of his basses, and I just didn't feel I was worthy of it. But I would go up there and I'd go in the room where all the basses were, and I'd just play them. I would just go up there and practice on his basses. Yeah, and then I graduated school and whatnot. And then years later, I met Eric on one of those Hal Wilner. I think it might have been. It's funny. I was talking to Eric the other day about it. I think it might have been the St. Anne's concert for the Harry Smith show. It was one of those. And I was just like totally blown away by him. Just kind of like, who is this guy? And then I forget what it was. I forget how it all started. I think he might have got in touch with me. Or we just made a decide. Yes, yeah. We decided to meet up for coffee, and we just met up. We started talking, and I was just like, "Man, I'm a huge fan of this. Whatever that is, you do." And I'd love to start something. And so he decided he wanted to pull in this guy Michael Evans on drums, and we rehearsed a bit and just got some stuff up. But then it just, Eric disappeared. He just kind of like that was it.
Now this was in New York.
This is in New York. Yeah, I had a little room down on Rivington Street that I was sharing with Van Remain. And then come to find out later, there was something that had nothing to do with me. And he was really, wanting to still do some work. And then by that time I had moved here, and he was on tour with Elliot Sharp, and I invited over to my place when I was living on Bühlenstraße, and I had my studio set up there, and I just started showing him all this stuff I was doing with the iPad stuff and the National Guitar, splitting it and doing this processing thing. And he just like picked up a mic and started singing, and immediately we had one song. I mean, it was like bam, and he got really excited. Then I brought him in. There was I did 5 years ago. I did this concert for Nepal to raise money for the earthquake survivors in Nepal, and we flew him in from New York to do the concert, and that's when we spent more time working on stuff, and then we were flying stuff back and forth between each other, and since then about every year he comes over and we do a handful of shows. We're continuing working on the recording, and recently we brought in Earl Harvin on drums, which means he basically plays. It's really interesting. He plays a drum machine with his hands, basically for the kick, and like cymbals and snare. He's sort of like, it's just like a cymbal, snare, and a drum machine, and maybe a few little percussion things.
Yeah, I watched him in the video. There's that video of the three of you working in the studio, which brings me to, did you start that record 4 years ago? Because it sounds like you're doing material that's on the record back then. It's back from 2016.
Yeah. No, we started it. We started the record probably about 4 years ago. Eric and I did, and we weren't even looking like it as it was a record. I mean, the whole idea was the thing with Eric and probably true to myself. It's all about the performance. We just you can't really capture these performances on record. But we wanted to have something that we could present. A lot of people want to have something tangible to be able to book dates and tours and whatnot. And that was kind of one of our goals. My girlfriend, Christina Vuk, did a trailer of what we do. So we had these tracks lying around, and then it was about last summer, Eric was here. We did some shows, and we just went through all the material that we had, and we actually found out what we really needed to have to fix. We were going to make a record with Victor Van Vogt, and that got a little complicated. And actually, it was Earl that was like, well, why don't you guys just produce it yourselves? And that's kind of because he said, what you do, nobody's going to really get it. Right. And so that's what we set. That's what got that ball moving. And the whole idea was to get this. Sorry, I've got multitasking here. Whole idea was to try to get this done and then pretty much mixed and find a label for it by, I guess, by now. just in time to not be able to tour behind it. And I went at Christmas time. I went to New York, and I spent a couple of days with Hal Wilner, talking about it, and I met with his lawyer / manager Rachel Fox about it, and we were kind of getting the team together on board. And then then COVID hit, then Hal died, and Rachel lost both her parents to COVID. Wow. And we were just like, this is just put it on the side. And, I was going to have somebody else mix it, but there was, again, it wasn't coming out the way we were wanting it. So I wound up mixing it myself. And Eric's very happy with it.
It sounds great.
Right now, thank you.
Yeah, before we get into the details of it, I wanted to ask you a more abstract question because like you, I mean, well, that record really is a great mix of real roots music like blues and modern excuse me, modern sounds, which is something I've always been into, and I've always looked for people that do that, and I found more than a few. I mean, I know you're not a fan of that apparently not a fan of that first Chris Whitley record, but I love that record. I mean, that's
Well,
for just that
that,
reason.
having said that, when I got away from it and became a little more open-minded, because I
Right.
was just so blown away by just seeing him there with this national and a mic on a stomp box,
Right.
that when I got my head around and revisited it, it's like, yeah, there's great stuff on it.
Yeah.
But actually, my favorite record of his is Soft and Dangerous Shores.
Is that the one where it's just him in a stomp box?
No, it's his last record.
I don't know if have you seen the movie?
No, I
I'm
haven't.
not sure. There's a kind of a roughish cut of the movie floating around somewhere that I was somehow able to see. It's really sad. I mean, I remember seeing him walk around the village looking like a drowned rat, and I had no idea who this guy was. And then that record came out, and then he came through when I was living in San Francisco with the Power Trio.
Yeah.
That was the loudest thing I think I've ever heard. He was playing through a double Marshall stack in a club smaller than the Bottom Line, or a full Marshall stack, playing the National through it. But anyway, this is all back to my.
Well, the thing is, we actually became, friends. And he called me. One period, he called me and he called me to play bass. And I'm saying, why are you calling me to play bass? He goes, well, I love the way you play guitar, but I want to see how you approach a bass doing what you do on guitar. So I went up in SIR with him and Dougie Bound for a couple of days, and we just jammed. And we sort of bumped into each other here and there, and it was just very, very sweet that I was doing a concert for, I forget who it was someone big in the business who had passed away, a tribute concert. And I was playing guitar for the Georgia Satellites and Cyndi Lauper. It was a very strange night. And out of the blue, Chris shows up. And he was something was off. And he kept grabbing me and hugging me and telling me how much he loved me, and he was crying. And I said, something's going down here.
Yeah.
And then I found out that he'd done the same thing with Richie over at Carmine. And sure enough, a month later, he was dead.
Oh right, yeah. That's sad.
It was really sad.
Yeah, but I bring that up because I was curious about your take on how roots music and modern electronic sounds intersect. Because that's a big part of what you're doing with Eric.
Well, I guess, that's a loaded question. I mean, I kind of look at what Sun Ra does. He was like mixing, kind of some basic big band horn arrangements with this out to lunch for Visa, through effects or, but I don't know. There's a couple things that I keep going back to, because I am very much into sort of primary sources with this whole thing, especially when it goes all the way back to like the Native American Indian, chants and dances and drum music. Like Charlie Patton, was a Native American Indian who, was probably the first real influential blues guitarist, who had to hide out in the black camps so he wouldn't get killed, because they still were, they were being threatened, especially if they started beating anything that sounded like a drum, and then you start hearing this. You start hearing these blues tones in their singing, and you start hearing even just the rhythm, the bum 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 that's all Indian drum music. That I don't know why I just sort of gravitated more to that sort of rootsy thing, just out of instinct, I guess. I don't know. But again, I've always had this thing, and it goes back to hearing Hendrix for the first time. What I loved about Hendrix wasn't his actual guitar playing; it was all the sounds he was making. All the, I keep thinking about. Actually, I was thinking about today. What would Hendrix be doing with all these effects that we have today if he was still alive? I mean, he was just this tape manipulation stuff, which I just really loved. And again, when the synthesizers came along, became big, they just sound too polished. And I just always felt this need to want to hear something that is synthetic sounding, in a sense, like futuristic sounding, but with some sort of graininess to it, something that was a little more earthy. Where I got to with the stuff with Eric is like, okay, and I got, before I even was working with Eric, I think it was what attracted Eric to what I was doing was like taking something like a 1930 National guitar and playing it through this stuff, getting some of these sounds using a lot of the granular synthesis in these iPads, where I could manipulate some of this stuff, where the original source was something much more organic than a sine wave. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, of course. I mean, and then Hendrix, bringing up Hendrix is perfect because he's almost the icon and the progenitor of the whole concept of combining roots music, blues and R&B, with modern electronic sounds. I mean, of course, he's like ground zero practically. But it's interesting. What I find interesting is what you're saying about that you find the granular synthesis stuff to be more earthy than regular synthesizers and sine waves and things like that. How did you first discover that?
Through Peter Freeman. You know Peter, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I interviewed him for the magazine also. And we get together out in L.A. at NAMM shows.
Yeah. Peter was the guy. Peter, I guess he heard what I was doing with a 2290. That was my big. I mean, I got really deep into the 2290, with all this deep modulation and different types of panning and stereo sampling and stuff like that. And I used to go and we met, and then I used to get together with him, and we would just record stuff in his little room at Shelter Island Studios. And then he was the guy who got me involved with computers. I mean, he gave me my first black and white copy of Cubase, which my father gave me a Mac II, and he taught me how to use all this stuff. Bought a sampler, and that was how I wrote and recorded Maggie Estep's record, "Love Is a Dog from Hell." And around that time, there was a lot of interesting stuff happening with people using samplers. I wound up working with Tricky, and just seeing him use a sampler, I was like, okay, that's music. I want to do that. And so it was basically sampling the guitar and manipulating it. And about that time, Peter was always like saying, "Knox, you have to get this. Knox, you have to get that." And before you know, it was, "Knox, you have to get the repeater." What was the company?
The Electrics.
Yeah, repeater. So I got the repeater, and I hooked it up to a MIDI controller. So I was like, putting the guitar through it and stretching it and playing it with a keyboard. And I just love the graininess of like being able to stretch the signal out a little bit and just grab some of that sound that just it reminds me a lot of. It's probably the same reason I really loved using those first generation whammy pedals, which I used a lot with like some of those earlier records with the Furs that I did, and I used it with like Darden Smith and all those like adult contemporary people when I was doing those sort of wash stuff. It doesn't track the pitch perfectly. It's got this sort of little warbles in there. That's the stuff that kind of speaks to me. There's little fluctuations where it's not perfect, where with the synthesizer, it always sounded so perfect that when I got more into going into, and Peter started turning me on to all the iPad stuff, class compliant, is where I could get that warbles type of stuff with actually moving my fingers over these grains over these audio files, finding these little spots, and then actually be able to adjust the shape and size of it within that parameter. So I'm getting all this sort of control over what to do with that fluttery stuff that really touched me, which to me sounds much more organic than playing around with this sine waves and processing them.
Right.
I don't. Yeah.
Well, so what makes you like? What do you like about using the National as a sound source as opposed to a solid body electric guitar?
Well, there's two guitars on that record that I use on the Bursting Blue Bone Bark records, and one is the National. It's a 1930s, and this has got the one of Chris Whitley's pickups on it, because they're very thin. They started making the fat. They couldn't get the ones they make now are fatter, but he had these thin ones. And I have it just tuned to like G, G, D, G, G, D.
Oh, okay.
Right? Just because I didn't want to be committed to major or minor. Also, being that these two strings are the same, and you not so much on this, but on the other guitar I'll show you, when I actually get into the higher register, like you're getting more of like some microtonal stuff. See?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you tilt it, it's the same. With slide, I use my second finger for a number of reasons. I get a lot more control over the vibrato. But also, if I'm playing in standard tuning, I can do, right? So you can play, you can tilt it, which I could never do on my pinky.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, that's an old lap steel trick.
Yeah. Right. Sort of. It's close. Okay, so with this National, it just has that sort of, especially tuned down, that low E is tuned down to a G, doubled with another G on the bottom. It just has this rattle. That, especially with Eric, his voice totally stimulated me to like go deeper with that sound. It's so much of what his thing is, that it's like you're listening to something. At least I feel like I'm connecting something that is way before my time.
Oh yeah, it's primal. I mean, he's got that howling wolf primal thing going on. Before we go on, that you said that's Chris Whitley's pickup. Is it the same type, or was that actually his pickup?
It was being held for him at Retrofret. They had gotten it. They had called him. They told him, "You've got pickups here," and it was sitting there. And then he died.
Wow.
And after he was the inspiration for me to buy the National. When he died, it was like, I think it was in a week later, I went and bought the National. I was like, I was heartbroken by it. I went and listened to all his records, and I was like, you know what, this guitar speaks to me. I never had a National. I don't think I ever even played one. And so then I bought that, and I was talking about a pickup, and they said, well, we're holding this for Chris, but you can have it.
Is that the only pickup on it? Just that one? Or is there another? And what do you run it into? Do you have a preamp?
I have an old Fishman. Right here. About 30 years old.
Sure, I remember those.
Yep. And I usually split it. And with this.
What is that? The Super Hard on, yeah.
Yeah. gives it a little extra sound and push going into the interface for the iPads.
And what interface are you using for that?
Sorry?
What interface are you using for that?
At home, I use the UCX, and live, I use the iConnect.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you using the iConnect to connect to a laptop as well?
I do both the laptop or iPad or two iPads. Lately, I've been doing a lot of stuff. I had this sort of free jazz electric trio thing. We played Poland a couple of weeks ago. It's a sort of a spin-off of Mars Williams' Alberta Christmas, which I tour every winter with Mars here in Europe. And I usually take two iPads and iConnect and a guitar, usually my Strat, and then I split that between my effects rack, my pedal board, I mean.
So I recognize everything there except the Coca. What's the Coca?
Oh, a wonderful compressor.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I split that going into an amp and then going into the iConnect with the iPads.
So how do you amplify the sound coming out of the iPads?
To the PA.
Okay.
Some cases I get a couple amps, but usually it's through the PA.
Yeah, because that's always interested me. Because I mean, you know Ivan Arset. You know who he is?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, he was doing a lot of stuff. He's one of the first guys I saw combining laptop and pedals and amps. But he always was running also into the PA. And, you know, I wanted to try to do that, but I was never in a position where I had a sound man where I could get a monitor mix, you know. So I tried a lot of different ways to get it to go through the laptop into the amp along with the pedals, and which is now possible because of the decrease in latency, you know, these days. And I think even Ivan's doing it like that now. I think the last time I spoke to him, he said he was going straight into the amps these days, not into the PA anymore.
You have a lot more control if you have a couple amps next to you that you can do it with. Yeah, it's but usually, I mean, with him, he's got more control over traveling and what he's going to have. So quite often, we're just going to a place and having to hit it,
right?
And chances are, the PAs are half decent. Quite often, I'll take just some headphones along or in-ears and just put them in a little bit if I need to hear more of a mix of myself.
Do you do you ever need to kill the main guitar sound going to the amp? I mean, do you ever do that, or is that always going along with whatever's coming out of the iPads?
No, I use I have an AB box.
Okay, so you can have either or both going on.
Either or both, yeah.
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 Yep.
And then here's the secret weapon.
I give up.
This is the electric guitar that's on the record. It's only this electric guitar and the National. This is a 1970 Hertecaster. It's a Japanese guitar that was made and sold in this German department store called Herte.
Okay.
And it's like the Silvertones at Sears.
Right.
And it's just the most amazing sounding guitar.
You know, those are the old DeArmonds. Everybody loves those.
And it's got this phase switch on it. No, it's just and this pickup's like right on the bridge.
Right.
But this is I don't think I could get away with what I do electrically on the Eric stuff without this guitar. This is so much of that sound.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, because it's cheap sounding.
Well, it's got the funk, yes.
It just has character. Now I've used this on other sessions. Like I remember I was going in and doing a session a couple of years ago. I forget who it was for. Victor Van Book was the producer, and like I brought my Les Paul, my Telecaster, an Epiphone, my Strat, and this guitar. And we had some time, so we would just constantly be trying to come up with different parts and this and that, and each and every time we'd go around the guitars, and it always would be that guitar.
That's, well, I can hear it on the record. I can hear that really bright sound. It sounds like it's compressed, and there's some whammy stuff on. I mean, like vibrato arm stuff on the record in one spot. Is that from that? I thought it might be your old Strat, but
No, it's. Oh, do you remember where it was?
let me see if I can. I think I wrote it down. No, I guess I didn't write it down. I just remember hearing something because I remember you have an old, really nice old Strat, and I thought it might be that. Just one place, where there's just like a wang on something, but I can't remember.
It could be slide. I don't use the bar that much on this guitar.
Yeah, probably. I doubt it stays in tune all that well. But do you have do you still have that Hofner violin shaped guitar that you played in the Sounds in Nepal?
Yeah, the thing I love about that guitar is it's really easy to bow it.
Right, I think you were
It's got the
bowing
right
it
shape
on that. Yeah.
for bowing it. Yeah.
Well, it's got a violin shape. Is that an old one or is it in really good shape?
No. It was weird. I think it was one of the maybe I was in New York for a minute, and I went into the Guitar Center, and just I was go and browse around, and there it was, just sitting there. It's weird. I have a Kent sort of violin shaped guitar. It's weird. It's violin shaped, but it has like a kind of like a cutaway, like one of the things like that. Very funky guitar from the '60s. I've always kind of liked that about them, that sort of shape of it. But anyway, I walked into the Guitar Center, and there was having a clearance sale, and it was, I don't know, it was up on the wall for like $150 or something like that. And I was like, wow, really? And I went and plugged it in, and I was like, this sounds great. I was like, are you kidding me? I started playing. This guy comes over to me, and he goes, are you going to buy that? And I said, well, I think so. And he goes, well, if you don't, I will. He probably worked for the store.
Yeah, they have a guy going around to everybody doing that.
Yeah. And so I just said, I can't go wrong. And I've done a bunch of gigs on it. I had it on tour with Jesper Monk. Because there are a couple songs I was doing some bowing on, and it got kind of beat up on the tour. I probably have to do some work on it, but yeah, it's got a thing.
Yeah. So, what apps are you using these days?
I primarily use a Blues Junior. That's it. The Blues Junior 4 with the Celestion in it.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about amps, but I was asking about apps, the iPad apps. Yeah.
They said amps. Yeah, I mean, thank you for turning me on to spacecraft. I'll pull them out. Here. Yeah, I go through this thing where I sort of burn out on what I'm using. I always have to push myself a little bit. But yeah, the spacecraft and tardigrade that you turned me on to, I've been really digging them lately.
Now tardigrade doesn't do it in real time. You have to put samples into it and manipulate them, right? It doesn't do any real-time
No,
processing.
I record into it. It doesn't. I record directly into it, then I manipulate it.
Right.
The
But
same way I
it
use
doesn't
same way I use sam.
like sampler.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, let's see. I use. Interesting enough, lately I've been using Flux FX a little bit.
Is that the Adrian
Sometimes
Blues?
I use, yeah, sometimes I use Bias FX, but really it's the same thing. Idensity, sampler, Yellow Fear, Borderlands, loop reverse. Loop reverse. That's the thing is that Peter helped design. That was all based upon the Electrics repeater. The only thing is like with the repeater, when you really stretch the wave, it had that granular thing that I really loved. Where with loop reverse, it's not as much.
Right.
It really is kind of precise. And then I also am using this app called Soup. Do you know it?
No, you mentioned it in your email, and I took a look at it. I mean, that's a kind of another one where you have to record stuff into it, and then you can manipulate it.
No, this is it. So if I turn the mic on, hey.
Okay, so it's capturing it, and then you can play with it.
It's pretty out there.
Yeah.
It's good. It's like Tardigan. It's something I use here and there. It's made by the same guy who made Donut.
Now, are you using them all at once through a mixer like Ohm, or are you using them
Oh,
Okay.
I'm using Ohm, except for Donut and Soup aren't. You can't use Ohm, so I'll have them in the background.
Now, what iPad are
But
you using? Because I'm finding that it's easy to start running out of CPU when you use a lot of these things. Like Ohm itself takes up an enormous amount of CPU.
Which iPads am I using?
Yeah, like what like are you using a Pro or just an
Yeah,
iPad
I'm using
2?
I'm using a Pro.
Okay,
This one's a Pro, and this one's in some older version. I don't have a lot. I don't have a lot on. This is for my Soup because I can't. The new operating system isn't compatible, so I
right.
kept this as my old operating system. And also I have on here I have like some other bits and bobs like some synth stuff. I have like Sector on here and let's see, where is it? Touchable and Impactor. Uh, um, Daedalus, Strum, Tornado is another one I use. Um, Grain Proc, Crystalline. Yeah.
And if you're using both iPads at once, live, how do you run the outputs? I mean, if
It's all going a stereo. This is stereo output out of the iConnect.
oh, of course, that's right, because it's going out through the USB and then back into iConnect. So you can run two
Yeah,
iPads at once. And how are you controlling the apps? Is it all by touch, or are you running
all
MIDI
by
controller?
all by touch. I have used MIDI controller, mostly for the stuff I do with Bias FX. I have a little Bluetooth, simply just to turn on and off. That's all I use it for.
Right.
But yeah, I like to use my hands.
Well, I was going to ask you about iDensity because I love it. You turned me on to it, I think. Either you or Rick Cox, but But I was wondering, is there any way to like control the delay on it, and sync it to some sort of tempo so that the effect comes at a time that kind of syncs with any kind of rhythm?
I've never sunken any of my apps up to like any sort of MIDI clock or anything. I've never done that.
Okay, it's
Um,
all
you
free
can
time.
you can control you can the delay on it is as far as the parameters is not good. It's delay. That's it. um, yeah,
Um,
so
okay.
it's not like you can really set it for any specific time or have it linked to anything. Um, I mean, it's the genius of that is really in the sound of it
Yeah, the
and be able
sound
to.
is amazing. It actually it does link to something like there's LFOs in it that I'm not
Yes,
sure what they do exactly. I guess you can assign them, I guess, to the grains or the length of things, and they will change that, and those LFOs, I believe, can be synced to some sort of clock. But
yes,
but the actual delay,
the actual effect delay is just
yeah,
to me it's kind of hit and miss.
it shows up when it shows up. Um, so yeah, we
But yeah,
talked about. I wanted to ask: are all the sounds on the record generated by guitar except for the drums? There's some very bass-like sounds on it.
well, I do play bass on it. I play upright bass on it. Um, the everything is from guitar. Yeah, it's all guitar. There's some drum programming I did, and even there's even Earl's on 3 tracks playing kit. But the rest of it is just it's program stuff that I've programmed and processed.
Okay, yeah, it's great sounds. Well, on "She Came Down," there's a great distortion sound that sounds like it has some sort of modulation on it. Do you remember what that was?
Do you know whereabouts it comes in?
It's like I think it's like you're playing kind of solos, you know, within the song. I mean, kind of single line things that sound like a guitar through a distortion, but with some kind of modulation on it.
It could it could be Eric that I processed Eric's voice. Is that what you're hearing?
No,
Or is it?
this is a guitar. It just sounds like a guitar going through a fuzz and either a flanger or a chorus or something like that. But given that you recorded this over 4 years, I'm not sure you can remember all the.
Some of it was recorded more recently. She Came Down the Mountain was recorded more recently. No,
Um,
there's no chorus. There's no flange. Um,
I'm just
I'm not sure
I have it on my
exact.
phone. I'm wondering if I could play it
If you
so,
play it, I could tell you.
so you could hear it. Here we go. Uh, uh,
She came down from the mountain with her driving shoes on, chased by the whispers
hmm.
of the devil himself.
The only problem is playing it on the phone. I can't.
Dancing through the brush
I
like a
can't fast forward through it. Anyway, it sounds great. Maybe you remember on Ghost Bones, there's kind of ring modulated bell type tones. I was, do you remember those? Sounds like almost gamelan.
Oh yes, yes. That is from Tornado,
And
where the kind of shifting interval type stuff.
yeah, is that on the laptop? Is Tornado? Do they make an iOS app or is that just a
They
plug?
make an iOS app, but that was on my laptop. That was in the computer. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, and there's some kind of pitch shifting things in various places where I'll hear the pitch kind of glide up or down. Do you remember what you?
That yes. There is again getting back to stretch. I really like to stretch sounds out. and like guitars, like, just if you take that sound and stretch it, till you get to the gooey insides. Like if you take gum and you pull it and it starts to come apart, and you see, I love that stuff. And by that company, Sound Hack, I believe it
Oh yeah.
is. Yes, that PV, it's a sampler that's in there. Um, what's it called exactly? PVC loop, I think it is. It's one of the plugins where it's 4 channels, and you can take, and I love this. For me, this one plugin really speaks to me. That and their spiral stretch I use a lot. Um, but you can take 4 channels and record into it, and then you can just stretch the shit out of it, right? And pitch each channel, gain each channel to your liking. But you find things where you get these sort of like, where your riff might be, but that and flooding it, but when you stretch it out, you get this, but yeah, it's always stretch the shit out of it and find these spots and then use them.
Wow. Yeah. So I was
There's a lot of
asking, did you basically start by, I mean, on this, by laying down the tracks like we saw in that, like we see in that video, and then adding stuff to it? Like, did you lay the original tracks down together, or was it put together, all
well,
put together piecemeal?
that video you saw. There's a song on there that's on the record called "Slave to the Craving."
Yeah.
And we took that recording, that actual recording from that session, and then I brought it here, and the guitar I was playing through a champ amp, and I wasn't really happy with it, so it was a bit of time finessing that sound, and there was a lot of leakage. But I then started adding things like, an extra guitar, some bass, some sound ribbon stuff, some flutes in the middle section, and it just completely took that and made it into a piece of music where that was very different. That was a bit different than the original recording. It was a bit of work, but yet it kept this feeling of it being live in some way. Most of the stuff we do, it's usually me writing a track, sending it to Eric, and he comes back with some ideas. I play with that, send it back to him. It's like a back and forth thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I was
then
saying,
then
which I was
then
thinking,
going we
sorry.
went to on 3 of the tracks. Then we went to Earl's studio and recorded him doing some drums on it, and moved it around, played around with that for a bit.
Yeah, you're getting some cool reverse guitar sounds. I was wondering what you use for reverse.
I use the particle, the Panda
Oh, the Red
for the
Panda.
reverse. Yeah, for the particle. Yeah, for the reverse delay stuff. You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you use. But sometimes you might be hearing something coming back in reverse on identity. Like sometimes I use identity as like a delay unit.
Oh, that's interesting. It would
Like
be more of
like
a,
you'll hear it on Slave to the Craving. So I'll have like two channels of identity running. One might be going forward and one might be going backwards. So I'll play something and you'll hear it like a delay, obviously granulated.
right. But yeah, you can set that. I forgot. You can set the granular aspect of that to where it's a lot less obvious, to where it's almost
Yes.
is like just a sampler and a delay if you make the grains really long. So it can work
So
like
it
that.
could be that too.
Cool.
But really, for any kind of like reverse delay, I use the particle. I love it. And sometimes, oh, actually, you know what? I also use the count to five, where I have it hooked up to an expression pedal. So I'll be playing it and turn it on, and that way I can do it. I have the expression pedal, so I can have the delay be pitched backwards or forwards. So sometimes you hear some stuff coming backwards, maybe at a different pitch. Um, that's what that is.
Oh, great. Yeah, as I was going to turn you on, I just found a great iOS reverse delay called Yale D. like Yale, like the college, and D.
Okay.
The only thing is, I don't think you can completely remove the original signal. You can put it on completely wet, but I'm not sure it gets totally rid of the original signal. But sometimes in a track, you won't really hear the original as much as you'll hear the reverse.
Yeah.
So the next thing I was going to ask you, and I guess we can wind the interview part of this deal up with you and Rick Cox and Peter were working on some sort of record.
It's still going on.
Yeah, that's what Rick says. I just
I was on the
interviewed.
phone with I was on the phone with Peter last night. He's just mixing and mixing and mixing and mixing and mixing. Yeah. I actually sent him a bunch of new stuff a while back. There was a section that he needed, like a solo section that he was working on, and I did a bunch of stuff here and sent it to him, and he's working that out. And then he got heavily into using samplers, like old samplers. He got a whole bunch of old samplers, and he's been loading them with Rick sounds. And actually, this morning I sent him a bunch of sound ribbon stuff for him to use, and one of his hard drives crashed or something, so he asked me to send it again. Yeah, but he's loading his samplers up with our guitar sounds.
Yeah. It reminds me that when home recorders first came on the market, and
Yeah.
if you didn't see somebody for like 3 months, you'd see them and you go, "Oh, you must have just gotten a home recording studio," because people start obsessing
But
with it.
I mean, his rig is just ridiculous. And actually, I'm about ready to buy a whole new studio for here. I'm just going into the winter, and I've been pretty much locked down. I'm in the middle of working on. Actually, I just sent another track to Eric, who got back to me with some stuff. And we're working on some new music with Eric. But I also have like two other record ideas that I've been working on this summer. That I really have to take my studio up a notch, and so I have to get a new computer and probably a new interface and some mic pre's, and so Peter's been helping me with that.
Yeah, he's the man. Well,
Oh,
cool.
he's
Thanks so much for doing this. I want to end the interview now and stop recording so we can. I want to talk to you about some other stuff. So,
okay.